transcript of the Macau Public Museum. As we know, the official language of Macau is traditional Chinese and Portuguese. For example, road signs, street names, official institutions, and legal provisions. According to data from Statistics and Census Service of Macau in 2018, the current total population of Macau is about 658,900. The overwhelming majority are Chinese, who are from Guangdong or Fujian. The remaining 6% are non-Chinese residents. They mainly from Portugal and other countries. On the other hand, there are about 181,499 migrant workers with blue cards or green cards, accounting for 27% of the total population. They are mainly from mainland China, Philippines, Vietnam, Hong Kong, Indonesia, and so on. The main language of Macau is Cantonese, spoken by 80% of population, and only 2.3% speak Portuguese. In recent years, immigration from mainland China has increased, and more people speak Mandarin. About 45% people speak Mandarin as a second language. English is considered an additional working language. 2.5 people are English native speaker, and more than a quarter of the Macau population speak English as a second language.
Then, we will discuss those 17 public museums of 19 in total, except for the 2 that has closed for a decoration. Those are Heritage Exhibition of a traditional pawn shop business, Maritime Museum, Museum of Taipa and Colonial History, Taipa House Museum, the Pating 9 Watch House, Macau Security Forces Museum, Museum of Sacred Art and Crypt, Natural and Agrarian Museum, Treasure of Sacred Art, Macau Museum, Macau Museum of Art, Fire Services Museum, Handover Gifts Museum of Macau, Macau Tea Culture House, Communications Museum, Macau Science Center, Commemorative Gallery of Macau Basic Law. We will discuss those museums from 6 aspects: door plate, pamphlet, description of exhibits, signs, guide tour, and website. For this topic, we propose to know about the language using in urban society in Macau, whose linguistic landscape is the emblem of a society. It constitutes the very scene, make of street, corners, circuses, parks, buildings, where the society's public life takes place. As such, this scene carries crucial socio-symbolic importances as it actually identifies. Thus, it is an emblem of a society. This time, we chose to go through the language use of Macau Public Museum to show the linguistic landscape in Macau as our project topic. Since Macau is a special city of China with its colonial history, and is also a tourism city, so the museums become the landmark site of this small city, with the cultural and urban characteristics inside. So we decided to walk through these 19 museums to see how the city grows and also get to know the features of language landscape that maintain in Macau society.
Here is the table that comparing the language use of the door plates. All museums written in traditional Chinese and none of them written in simplified Chinese. Heritage exhibition of traditional pawnshop business and the Planet Night Watch House didn't written in Portuguese and English. And Macau Museum and Communication Museum also didn't written in English only. Heritage exhibition of a traditional pawnshop business is a pawnshop that opened in 1917. It was originally the property of a wealthier businessman in Macau, and it is a pawnshop building with a relatively complete structure. And in order to preserve the history and the culture of Macau, the government has carried out repairs and collection of Duxing on and set up a pawn shop exhibition hall, and that means this museum wanted to show the original pawn shop in the old time to the visitor, so it did not have a Portuguese or English door plate outside the museum. The Platinum Night Watch House is similar to traditional pawn shop museum. This museum records the history and changes of dagang in Macau. Dagang is a nighttime reporting work in ancient China, and at that time, it also has the function of reminding people of fire prevention and thief prevention. And in the old days, the worker flew by cocking the cones to patrol the night. The night was divided into 5 shifts, about 2 hours per shift. Although the voice of Dagang has gone away, but in this exhibit hall, we still can see the old traditions. It also a renewal of an old-time night watch house, so its door plate only written in Chinese. The language of the door plate in Macau Museum does not have English. We guess the reason that Macau Museum was complete and opened in 1998. It was a very old history museum, and it was designed by Portuguese architect, and English was not so popular in that time. And the other is Macau Communication Museum, and we think that this museum is influenced by Portugal, and this museum is built in 1988. And there is a very special museum that is Museum of Secret Hearts and Crypts. Each door plate has Japanese. Later we will explain it in detail. Then there is a table comparing the language use of the pamphlets. Only 40 museums provide pamphlets, all written in traditional Chinese and none of them written in simplified Chinese. Then there is a table comparing the language use of the pamphlets. Only 40 museums provide pamphlets, all written in traditional Chinese and none of them written in simplified Chinese. Only one didn't written in Portuguese is the Planet Night Watch House. It provides English version but didn't provide Portuguese version. And then we guess maybe there's many tourists come to visit the museum to learn Chinese culture, so it provides the English version for the foreigner. And the Basic Law Museum also didn't written in English. Then we think that it should, because Macau Basic Law that is written in our official language, that is traditional Chinese and Portuguese, so it didn't provide the English version for the visitor. Then there is comparing the language use of the description of exhibit. 100% written in traditional Chinese and none of them written in simplified Chinese. Only one museum didn't written in English and Portuguese, that is Macau Security Forces Museum. And the Museum of Secret Hearts and Crypts written in Japanese that we have mentioned before. Only one didn't written in Portuguese is the Planet Night Watch House. It provides English version but didn't provide Portuguese version. And then we guess maybe there's many tourists come to visit the museum to learn Chinese culture, so it provides the English version for the foreigner. And the Basic Law Museum also didn't written in English, then we think that it should because Macau Basic Law that is written in our official language, that is traditional Chinese and Portuguese, so it didn't provide the English version for the visitor. We conclude that why Macau Security Forces Museum didn't written in English. We guess maybe this museum didn't have many tourists to visit because it's not in a tourism area, and it's also is a very old history museum that since 1984, maybe it's just too old and it didn't update their description. So it didn't provide any Portuguese or English description for the visitor.
The language used of the signs in the museum are all written in traditional Chinese. None of them are written in simplified Chinese. Almost all of them are written in Portuguese and English. Only two museums are special. The Pandan Night Watch House does not have Portuguese and English, and the Museums of Secret Art and Crypt have a special language, Japanese, that the other museums don't have. The Pandan Night Watch House does not have Portuguese and English. As John mentioned before, the Pandan Night Watch House is a museum that introduces Macau's past culture, so it only have Chinese. There is only one museum that have Japanese, the Museum of Secret Art and Crypt. The tomb contains the remains of Japanese and Vietnamese martyrs who were moved from the St. Francis Church in Coloane. In 1596, Japan banned Catholicism and captured local Catholics so aggressively that many of them fled to Macau. They lived behind the Museum of Secret Art and Crypt at that time. It may be that some Japanese have been there before. That's why there is Japanese. This is the language use of the guide tour. Only 9 museums are provided guide tour. 100% can speak Cantonese, 88% can speak Mandarin, 77% can speak English, and only 33% can speak Portuguese. No other languages are provided. For public guide tour, it's always used Cantonese, Mandarin, and English. We think that Macau is a tourist city. In recent years, more and more Chinese and foreigners visit Macau. Mandarin and English has been specially added to meet their needs. Why is the percentage is so lower of guide tour using Portuguese? We think that there are really very few people know Portuguese in Macau, but it still have Portuguese guide tour because it's for school. Macau has some Portuguese schools and they will visit the museum together. The language use of websites are almost all have Chinese, Portuguese, and English, except the Macau Security Forces Museum and Fire Services Museum. The Macau Security Forces Museum and Fire Services Museum don't have English. We think that they may not be a popular museum in Macau. Maybe someone who works as a security guard or fireman is more interested in these two museums. Also, there are museums more like government departments. Therefore, they may be used the official language of Macau, Portuguese and Chinese, to represent their website. On the other hand, there are some websites have simplified Chinese. Maybe these museums are popular for tourists, and there are more Chinese come to visit Macau recently, so for their convenience, simplified Chinese is specially added.
Here is the chart of linguistic landscape of Macau public museums. The language use of the door plate: 100% written in traditional Chinese, 0% written in simplified Chinese, 88% written in Portuguese, 76% written in English. The language use of the pamphlets: only 14 museums provided pamphlets. 100% written in traditional Chinese, 0% written in simplified Chinese, 92% written in Portuguese, and 92% written in English. The language use of the description of exhibits: 100% written in traditional Chinese, 0% written in simplified Chinese, 94% written in Portuguese. Only one museum doesn't written in English or Portuguese, that is Macau Security Forces Museum. 94% written in English. Only one museum written in Japanese, that is Museum of Sacred Art and Crafts. The language use of the signs, 100% written in traditional Chinese, 0% written in simplified Chinese, 94% written in Portuguese, and 94% written in English. Only one written in Japanese, that is Museum of Sacred Art and Craft, 5% written in other language. The language use of the guided tour, 100% use Cantonese as guided tour language, 88% use Mandarin, 33% use Portuguese, and 77% use English, 0% use other language. The language use of the website, 100% used in traditional Chinese, 64% written in simplified Chinese, 100% written in Portuguese, 88% written in English, and 0% in other language. That is the linguistic landscape of Macau Public Museum. From the above data, it can be seen that English is widely used in Macau Museum. Almost every museum's website and description of exhibits are illustrated in English, so as to facilitate tourists and English users. In the museum, not only will be the basic facilities be in English, for example, the description of exhibits, but even some statements and temporary announcements will be translated into English and Chinese. As an international tourist city, English is dispensable. English is an international language and a bridge between Macau and the world. However, language in Macau is very rare in other countries, such as Korean and Japanese. As an international tourist city, in order to more effectively improve the Macau Museum information recommended to the practice of foreigner, in the museum can add different information sources, such as using the QR code to provide information or multilingual phone voice equipment or copy. Offers visitors a more convenient and diversified tour.